us tonight. We're happy to relive our adventure from a year or so ago. So it was just about a year ago that Karen and I took off on a 3-week adventure to the Falkland Islands, South Georgia, and the Antarctic Peninsula. This trip left from Ushuaia, which was the southernmost city in the world. This trip was with Quirk Expeditions, and we were on the Ocean Adventurer. The Ocean Adventurer was a relatively small ship. It's only about 100 meters in length, and it accommodates about 120 guests. This particular trip offered a kayaking option, which is what made it stand out for us. So many people have asked how you even get to Ushuaia, and for us it involved a flight from Chicago to Houston, changing planes, and then an overnight flight from Houston down to Buenos Aires, where we spent the day. And the next day, we took another 3-hour flight from Buenos Aires down to Ushuaia. Once we got there and got on board the ship, we got quickly settled into our cabin. And before we knew it, we were underway off to the Falkland Islands. This was about a full day trip. And here we're at sunset in the Beagle Channel, leaving Ushuaia. And when we were at sea, we spent quite a bit of time on deck watching seabirds that like to follow the ship and try to grab prey out of the wake of the ship. Here we're looking at a northern giant petrel and a black-browed albatross and a white-chinned petrel. It took us a full day to reach the Falklands. When we got there, we spent 2 full days, and we did a total of 3 shore excursions, 2 of them on the western island, and the 3rd shore excursion was at Stanley, which was the capital of the Falklands. The first 2 shore excursions were primarily to visit bird colonies. And at the bird colony on West Point Island, there was a mixed colony of rockhopper penguins and black-browed albatrosses. The rockhopper penguins were pretty lethargic. At this time of year, they were undergoing a molt in which they're growing in a completely new set of feathers. The molten penguins as a catastrophic molt because they grow in all their new feathers at once. You can imagine this was a fairly energy demanding activity. And so they basically slept all the time and just grew new feathers. In contrast, the black-browed albatrosses, the parents were spending quite a bit of time feeding their half-grown chicks a diet of squid and krill. About 70% of the world population of black-browed albatrosses breed on the Falklands. They have a widespread distribution in the southern oceans and a fairly well distributed large population. The bird colony attracted a fair number of scavengers, including this kelp gull, as well as turkey vultures and striated caracaras. The turkey vultures on the left and the caracaras in the bottom right. And if you look closely, the caracaras on a albatross chick wing. So the bird colony on Saunders Island also had a large number of imperial cormorants mixed in with the penguins and albatrosses. Saunders Island was also home of upland geese, which like to use the pastures. So Stanley was the first place that we ever bird watched in a former minefield. These mines were laid out by the Argentinians during the Falkland Wars in the 1980s. And most of the mines had been cleared, but occasionally one would still wash up on the beach. Fortunately for the penguins, they were too light to set off the mine. So the minefields was actually sort of a refuge for the penguins. The penguins like to burrow into the banks to put their nest in burrows. Another unique bird of the Falklands is the flightless steamer duck. It was really funny to watch the steamer ducks because they, instead of using their wings for flying, they use them like on a paddle boat. Just
It's weird.
well, at Stanley, we did take in some local culture with a pub lunch of fish and chips. And as we were leaving Stanley, there was an ice cream social on the back deck. And as we were leaving the harbor, we were joined by a pair of Peel's dolphins.
So I'll be starting the next part, but if there are any questions, Todd, in the chat that people want, you can answer a few now.
Todd's muted.
You're good, Karen. You go right ahead.
Okay, great. So it was about 900 miles and 2 days at sea from the Falklands to South Georgia Island. And during that first night, we crossed the Antarctic Convergence, and that's where the relatively warm southern Atlantic waters meet the cold Southern Ocean, and the air temperature dropped about 15 to 20 degrees. And we were now in the home of the wandering albatross. They have the longest wingspan of any living bird. It's from 8 to 12 feet. So these huge, wide birds. And then, I loved watching the albatrosses, but on the second afternoon of the crossing, we spotted a pair of blue whales. So this was something that has been on our bucket list to see blue whales, and there they were. And it was the first time we'd ever seen them, and the ship's captain had only seen them once before during 30 years at sea. And we even got one spy hopping, which was really, really cool. And the blue whale populations in the Southern Atlantic appear to be recovering after years of exploitation in the early 1900s. So it's really good to hear that their population is now increasing. So the South Georgia Islands are a British overseas territory. There are no permanent residents, but in the summertime, there are about 100 people that live on the islands, mostly government officials, and then there are a lot of research scientists there too. And visitation to the islands is very highly regulated to minimize impacts. And each site has a detailed visitor management plan that specifies how many ships of what size can visit per day, how many passengers can be on shore, where to land, what the closed areas are, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is very well outlined to minimize impacts. And biosecurity was at all of our landings, we had foot baths with very seriously. Here we are picking out grains of sand from the bottoms of our boots. We don't have Todd's picture of wiping off our boots with the brushes that's at every trail here in Wisconsin. We had to pick out every grain of sand from our boots. We had to vacuum our backpacks and our coat pockets because Velcro is a great place to trap seeds. And then when we returned to the ship, they had these pressure washers set up to clean our boots and our pants, which was really good at getting everything off.
Yeah, a big concern there was getting off the penguin poop.
Right. And South Georgia has been actively managing invasive species and recently completed a rat eradication program, as well as removing reindeer. And South Georgia was our first opportunity to go kayaking, which we absolutely love. The kayaking adventure was an extra option, and about 15 people signed up for it. And you did need some prior kayaking experience to go on the excursions. So the kayaks were let down off the deck with a crane and then tied to a Zodiac and pulled to where we were going to kayak. And then when we arrived at our destination, everybody helped everybody else get in their boats. The guides were on the outside of the kayaks, making sure everything was stable. And both of us have paddled in cold water quite a bit before, so this wasn't anything that we were definitely afraid of. I love kayaking in cold water. And it was especially with the critters that we saw here. It was pure joy to paddle with fur seals all around. They'd jump up and they'd hit your bow. And then you get king penguins off in the distance. And then you get closer to the king penguins and really close to the king penguins. And there are more fur seals. Sometimes we were in a double, but if you know Robert and I, you know that I'm really short and my feet don't reach the foot pegs in doubles like this, even with them all the way forward. Robert fit pretty well in this particular boat. And this is just a few pictures of what it looked like at South Georgia Island from the water. And we have a smiling paddler with others smiling in the background. And more smiling paddlers. We had a great group of kayakers. So that was great. One afternoon, we had the opportunity to do a shore landing on Prion Island. And Prion Island is an important breeding colony for the wandering albatross. So South Georgia's home for some 1,500 pairs of wandering albatross, which is about 6% of the whole world population. The population of wandering albatross is declining, and it's listed as vulnerable, with the primary threat being long-line fishing. They get caught in the nets. There are also brown skuas nesting on Prion Island. And there were quite a few Gentoo penguins near the beach. And then sometimes the wildlife came to us, as these snowy sheathbills like to hang out by the hot tub. So these are the 3 king penguin colonies we visited on South Georgia Island. So these are king penguins on Salisbury Plain, and they're about 3 feet tall, just a little bit shorter than me. They're deep divers. They can go down to almost 800 feet, and there's about 1 million of them on South Georgia Island. There was a highway of penguins going to and from the water. And notice the glacier in the background there. And there were all different stages of young and adult penguins. And we took lots of penguin pictures, especially Robert, just because you can't get enough of king penguins. And they would come right up to you. It was just really fun.
You could imagine the conversations they were having amongst themselves.
They look you right up in your eye like that. We totally love this day. But it got even better at the next stop. More king penguins, about 250,000. They were just all over. Some swimming, some walking, some just standing there. Robert taking lots of pictures.
was raining during that
Yeah, it
afternoon.
was. And one of the most fun things was that I had my posse follow me for about a half an hour. There wasn't a huge size difference between us, and I walked at penguin pace. And Ann Burton calls this the "Are You My Mother" picture. And not all the inhabitants of the penguin colonies were penguins. There were female and young elephant seals, which are really big. They didn't do a whole lot, but just laze around. And the big bull males had already left the beaches and they were out to sea. And there's about 400,000 elephant seals on the island. And lots of fur seals, which especially the pups are really darn cute. And there are about 3 million that call South Georgia home. And fur seals were nearly hunted to extinction by the early 1900s before they were protected. There were lots of pups.
But their populations have bounced back incredibly.
Yes, a lot. But fur seals can be fairly aggressive, so we definitely tried to keep our distance. Sometimes one of the young would charge us, but then the mom tried to keep them in line.
Now, you don't want to get bit by a fur seal because the bite can get infected and be some pretty nasty infections.
And then we also got to Zodiac cruise past a macaroni penguin colony. And these were much smaller penguins. And I just loved how they would jump out of the water and land upright. And there are about 1 million pairs of macaronis on South Georgia. Worldwide population of over 10 million.
So we did get a chance to visit. Oh,
Any questions at all, Todd?
We start with a few wildlife questions. Like, could you give us a sense of how loud that was with all those animals out there?
it
was loud.
It was loud.
Yeah, in the penguin colonies, the king penguin colonies, it definitely was loud.
Yeah, they. It's kind of hard to describe what they sound like, but the best I could come up with is sound like they were blowing kazoos.
Yeah.
Nice.
So
So
it was also kind of smelly.
Right.
So it's like being at a Packers game or something at third
Right.
quarter.
Right. Exactly.
All right. How about a sense of the air temperatures and the water temperatures and stuff like that? I mean, you look like you're pretty well dressed, but.
Yeah. So when you're on the south of the Antarctic convergence, around South Georgia and then to the peninsula, we were often getting air temperatures that were right around 32 degrees. And the water temperature was right around 32 degrees. So, you know, it wasn't super cold unless the wind was blowing.
Okay. And being from Wisconsin, that's nothing.
No.
No.
We dressed for the weather. We were fine.
We have, let's see, a few comments. These photos are outstanding. And one question, was southern Georgia where Shackleton landed?
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that here in a second.
Ooh, excellent. All right, back to you.
All right. So, as I said, we got a chance to visit Grytviken. Grytviken's the capital of South Georgia. And it's the site of a former whaling station. So this area was the sort of the center of the South Atlantic whaling industry for nearly 60 years, from about the beginning of the 1900s through 1962. At its peak, there was more than 300 men were stationed at Grytviken. Nowadays, there's a visitor center and a museum, a church, and some of the, historic structures left over from the whaling industry. And as somebody mentioned, Ernest Shackleton made his way with a small boat and a few survivors. They sailed from the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula up to South Georgia. But when they got to South Georgia, they realized they were on the wrong side of the island and then had to cross the mountains to get to Grytviken. And so ultimately the folks from South Georgia rescued the rest of Shackleton's crew, and then Shackleton returned to the area later, and now he's buried on South Georgia. So we had a chance to visit his grave and offer a toast to the memory of Ernest Shackleton. And here we are pulling away. We had a chance to see another blue whale.
Yes.
3 in one trip. And this one didn't stick around very long, but we were thrilled to see it. So after 3 days on South Georgia, it was time to set sail for the Antarctic Peninsula. Not long after we left South Georgia, we spotted a group of fin whales. And these were the second largest whales after blue whales. They can grow up to about 90 feet in length. We also started seeing icebergs. These were pretty decent sized icebergs. We wouldn't want to run into them. And the new kid on the block were the Cape petrels. The pattern of black and white on them was just incredibly striking. We did do a stop at the South Orkney Islands, which is about halfway along to the peninsula. And here we visited an Argentine research station. This was the longest continuously operated station in Antarctica. They primarily do weather research. Here we did another kayak excursion. And we saw our first leopard seal. So leopard seals are one of the top predators in Antarctica. And this one was in the process of eating a penguin when we saw it. We thought it was a good idea to give it a wide berth. There was also Weddell seals, and they were much more mellow. There were fur seals on the beach, or elephant seals on the beach. And fur seals came up to greet us. As we continued on toward the peninsula, we saw more icebergs and ice floes with seals and penguins. This was a chinstrap penguin and an Adelie penguin. This is a southern fulmar. And as we approached the peninsula, we were watching for one particular iceberg, iceberg A68A. Big icebergs get their own letter number codes. And this was an iceberg that was worth keeping track of. We even found it. So when we found this iceberg, it was the largest iceberg in the world. And the time we saw it, it was about the size of the state of Delaware. So this iceberg broke off of the Larsen Sea ice shelf on the east side of the peninsula in July of 2017. And then over the course of the next 2.5 years, it worked its way further north along the Weddell Sea. And by the time we saw it, it was up off the northern tip of the Antarctic Peninsula. This was a tabular iceberg. It was about 600 feet thick, with about 80 feet sticking up above the surface. Almost immediately after finding the iceberg, we started seeing whales. We cruised along this iceberg for nearly 5 hours, and whales around us almost the whole time. Most of the whales were humpbacks, but there are also fins, sei whales, and a few orcas. The whales were usually accompanied by numerous seabirds, including the snow petrel. Humpbacks can be individually identified by the patterns on their tails. We even reported some of these pictures to an organization that keeps track of humpback whales around the world. There must have been at least 100 whales that we saw that afternoon, maybe hundreds of whales. Some of the guides were saying that it was the best day of their career, and one of the guides said it was the best day of his life.
We thought it was a pretty darn good day too. Hundreds of whales. Wow.
We even witnessed a large section of the iceberg calving off and producing a sizable wave. I was standing on the bow of the boat at the time and sort of held on, but the wave had calmed down by the time it actually got to us. Since we saw A68A last February, it's been on a distance in the last year. In December, there was a lot of big concern in the scientific community that it might run aground just offshore from South Georgia. And there was a lot of question as to what impacts having an iceberg almost the size of the South Georgia island itself would have on the penguins. But in January, it hooked off to the south, and now it's been breaking up into numerous small pieces, smaller pieces. Some of these are still pretty big. But I think the concern about the impact on the penguins is diminished. And we could stop there if there's any questions at this time.
Yeah, Robert, let's go back to kayaking by those different seals and stuff like that. Did any of them ever come out and, like, you know, smack the bottom of your kayaks or any fun stuff like that?
Sometimes the fur seal pups would come up and try to jump on the deck of the kayak, but
Yeah, they
Really?
kind of come up and hit the bow.
Nice.
They were playing.
Were you playing with them, or were you like, uh-oh?
Oh no, I thought it was fun.
Nice.
Close
nice.
interactions with wildlife. Yeah.
we were not reaching out to try to pet
No,
them.
no. Wouldn't do that. I know they bite.
Nice. You think when that iceberg calved off, you think all those whales were there because the iceberg was sort of funneling fish toward them under the water?
What we learned, ended up contacting a researcher that's been studying large icebergs. And it turns out that as the iceberg is, the ice is coming off the glacier, it grinds up a lot of rocks. And as it floats out there, a lot of this ground minerals are being released into the water, and it's fertilizing the water, which is then causing lots of krill. It's, you know, contributing to the productivity of krill. And so the whales were actively feeding on the krill from the fertilizer that the iceberg was providing.
Wow, that's cool. Hey, a question about the breeding season for the birds down there. Is it like up in the Arctic where they're only there for like 6 or 7 weeks and then the show's over?
It's different between different birds. So the king penguins have a long, it takes more than a year to raise a penguin chick, a king penguin chick. And so they're basically in the colony year round.
And you have penguin chicks at different stages throughout the year. So there's no one particular, this is the breeding month.
Oh, okay.
But
Yeah.
then there's
Yeah.
other birds that,
I think
Yeah.
The albatrosses, I think, were more synchronized. And
right.
so we were there sort of toward the end of summer. Sort of, we were there from late February to early March, which was getting toward the end of summer. So
Okay.
All
right, one more question about what causes the striations in the iceberg.
It
That could be
depends
for
on
Jim
how
on-
they're formed, how much compaction at the time, how much snow there is to provide weight to compact it, and how much air is being able to trap in the ice there.
Okay. Well, I think you can move on.
Okay.
So the crew did a great job of guiding us. We were allowed into the bridge. And this was our first view of the Antarctic Peninsula. And right around there, we spotted a pod of orcas, which was another top predator in Antarctica. And they're pretty darn big.
And fast.
And fast, yes. And we saw quite a few kelp gulls. In Curtis Bay, we had a grand time kayaking with icebergs. And our gear kept us pretty warm most of the time. We were able to stay warm.
We were wearing dry suits over layers of fleece. The blue gloves were rubberized but insulated. They were quite effective.
And I really like paddling with icebergs. I can't get enough of it. I've done it in Greenland, Alaska, now Antarctica. And every iceberg, is different. Some of them are little and some of them are big. And the person that was asking about, what makes them different, everyone's a different shape. They can be many shades of blue. They can be white. They can be all kinds of colors in between. I was probably looking at some bird there.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of glaciers. And then we watched some imperial cormorants. And sometimes we had lots of ice to paddle through.
A little chunky at
Yeah,
times.
that was pretty thick ice. This wasn't quite as thick, but lots of bergy bits around in
And,
there.
some bigger bergs in the back, and we gave those large ones a pretty wide berth because they're not entirely stable, and I think one of them actually rolled.
We saw it roll, but we were far enough away. We kept far enough away
Yeah,
that we weren't in danger.
The guides did a really good job of keeping us herded and safe.
So here's Team Kayak. Like I mentioned before, we had a really good group of people to kayak with. And we paddled on. Robert's happy. And we saw more imperial cormorants. And just a few more pictures of us paddling with ice. And we made it onto the continent and we had spectacular views of icebergs. Because that's what you see when you go to Antarctica.
Rocks and ice.
So at Enterprise Island, we headed out past icebergs and we saw some humpback whales in the distance there. And now you're not supposed to paddle up to the whales, which we didn't. We saw the whales and we stopped and they kept coming closer and even closer. And Amy, one of the guides, showed how thrilled she was with yes. And we were thrilled too. She told us that towards the end of the trip that we'd had more close encounters with wildlife than any other kayak trip she'd ever led down in Antarctica. I think maybe anywhere. So the humpbacks came right up to the boats. And once I had a young humpback on the right side of my boat, I saw it there and I looked over to the left and its pectoral fin was over on the other side of my boat. So I was over top of a whale. And yeah, the young ones seem to be really curious. They love to just come up and check you out and see what you're doing.
But I think the moms kept a close eye on everybody.
Yep, and they would come close too. Yeah, like really close. It was pretty incredible. And I was not afraid, I don't think any of us were afraid that they were going to tip us over. And again, Amy was thrilled. And the whales just kept checking us out.
Probably were, around them for over an hour.
Yeah, at least an hour, probably over an hour. Yeah, like right there. Yeah, it's just an incredible thing to be this close and to have them right around you, checking you out and seeing what you're doing. We were really, really happy. And we had a barbecue on the deck, which didn't faze us Wisconsinites at all.
Lots of good meat.
Yes, and there's sunset. And then we went to Paradise Harbor the next day. And the kayaks were let down on top of a Zodiac. We call this minke morning. We saw a bunch of minke whales. They're smaller and about 30 feet long, and they're very fast swimmers. And again, they came to us. We didn't go to them. We saw them and stayed right where they were, and then they were right there with us. And they came right up around. They'd turn over. They did some spy hopping, sticking their heads up so that they could see us. And then they went under the boats. One time they even slightly lifted one up, and they like to come in between the kayaks. And the guides brought hot chocolate in a thermos, and we celebrated our sightings. Lots of really good days. But then at Fournier Bay, it was even more incredible. This was one of the most surreal and wonderful days of our lives. We went there because the wind was really strong in the Gerlache Straits, about 30 knots with gusts to 50. And as you can see, it was snowing. And there were humpbacks all around again. They came to us and they made all these sounds. There were grunts and there were blows and there were snorts. and there were groans.
And so what was so magical about this was that the visibility was fairly limited. We could maybe only see 100 yards, 200 yards because of the heavy snow, but you could hear whales way off in the distance all around us. There was lots of whales in the bay. You know, very few of them you could actually see.
Except the ones right next to you.
Yeah, except the ones that came right up to us.
There was one spy hopping. And yes, we were having fun. And we even had a snowball fight with the snow that was collecting on our kayaks, and a whale came up right in the middle. And luckily we missed hitting it.
So we could pause here for a second to see if anybody has any questions at this moment.
Oh, there's a few questions. Let me scroll back to the top. How can you ever enjoy Mirror Lake State Park again?
We will.
Mirror Lake
It's okay.
is pretty cool too.
Yeah.
All right, well, okay. From Susan Miller, did you write a poem for glaciers?
No, Robert's creativity is pictures, but I did not do a poem, no.
Well, this presentation is more than adequate. It is awesome. What was the visibility of the water like? What kind of depth in some of the places? How far down could you see?
We were on sunny days along the peninsula. It was fairly clear. Well, we could see, you know, krill swimming in the water. We could see other life in the water. So
Nice.
when there was snow on top of water, we couldn't see very much in the water other than the snow.
All right, we also have from Jen Kobe Lucky saying, "What a charmed trip!" Exclamation point. I agree
We're
with her on
so
that.
dang lucky.
How immense were the whales compared to your boats?
Well, the humpbacks, probably what, 70 feet, and the boats,
17 feet.
17 feet. So they're pretty darn big compared
Pretty
to.
big, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now
let's
the
see.
minke whales were only double a kayak. So those
Okay.
smaller whales.
Now there is one question about whales. Like, were most of the whales baleen whale types that fed on krill, or were there others like the orcas? But that came in just before you showed the orcas.
Yeah. Most of the big ones were baleen krill feeders, but yeah, we did see some orcas.
Did you have like a sense sometimes, like when you go to Yellowstone or some of our national parks, when there aren't too many people around, like you got a view to like a window back in time when it was just all these wild creatures?
Yeah.
Yep.
And, you know, it was very different from the feeling of Yellowstone because it was so well managed that, you know, I think we might have seen one or two other ships.
The whole time. And this was 20 days.
But most of the time they kept the ships spaced out. So you always felt like your ship was the only one there enjoying it at the time, even though, you know, there might be another one coming in, you know, a few hours later.
Okay.
But you just don't see them. So you feel like you're the only ones there.
What is there, like a governing body or somebody that coordinates all that?
There's like an association of Antarctic tour companies that regulates the industry.
Okay. All right, well, that's it for questions at this point.
All right, well, we will move on to Denko Island. So this was our last full day on the peninsula. And it was the one time that Karen and I decided that we were going to split up and go our different ways. Karen wanted to go kayaking,
Surprise, surprise.
But I wanted to spend the whole morning at the Gentoo penguin colony. There's about 1,600 pairs of Gentoos that use Denko Island. And these chicks were mostly grown. And many of the adults were growing in a new set of feathers. You could see the old feathers on top and the new ones coming in. It was snowing lightly that morning, and some of the chicks were having fun trying to catch the snowflakes in their beaks.
That was just really fun to watch them.
It was just a lot of fun hanging out with the penguins. So Gentoos are the third largest penguin, and their breeding colonies are located on ice-free surfaces, and they make stone nests. You notice the rocks are all sort of tinged with pink from digestate krill. The worldwide population of Gentoos is about 750,000, so it's a fairly sizable population, but some of their populations do appear to be declining. But it was a great morning to hang out with the penguins. The chicks were so darn cute.
Oh.
But wait, there's Karen. I thought you were out kayaking. Why are you out kayaking?
Well, we planned to go kayaking. We got out in the Zodiac, and the Zodiac was pulling the kayaks. But then there was a leopard seal that decided to pay attention to us. And it paid close attention to us. And then it started biting some of the kayaks. It was actually playing bumper boats with the kayaks. It would come up on one side and push them, and then it would swim under it, go to the other side and push them back. And then at one point it was starting to get into some of the cockpits, at least trying to. And we decided, you know, probably not a good idea to go kayaking with this leopard seal that's trying to climb into a cockpit with you.
Leopard seals have been known to kill people?
Yeah, they're one of the top predators in Antarctica. And there are a few people that say that they're really nice to be around, but those are in the minority. I'll keep a healthy distance from leopard seals. They were fun to watch. So then we took off in the Zodiac, pulling the boats, thinking, okay, fine, we'll go find another place to kayak. We outran the leopard seal and getting ready to get into the boats. And there's a male orca like right near us. So the other top predator in Antarctica. So we decided to just watch the orca for a while, which I didn't get a picture of.
But all too soon, it was time to say goodbye to Antarctica and head north across the Drake Passage. This was about a 600-mile or 2-day crossing. And on the way, we did more seabird watching with more Cape petrels and southern giant petrel. And after 2 days at sea, we were approaching Cape Horn, the southern tip of South America. It was time to bid farewell to Captain Yuri and the Quark team and all the new friends that we met along the way. So with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions there might be.
Hey, thanks, you guys. Really enjoyed that. Let's do a couple questions if you're still up for it.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Did you feel primarily hopeful or sad during the trip when thinking about the impacts of climate change?
We certainly did think about it and see some of the effects. We did hear from some of the guides that they were giving lectures to us during crossings and at night. So yeah, it was a sad time, and I wanted to get to Antarctica to see it before way too much was gone. After living in the Arctic, I lived in Northwest Alaska for 8 years from 1980 to 88, back when it was a lot colder, to see the effects. But yeah, there's definitely some sadness thinking that it's not going to be like that forever.
But, as things change, not everything is in a negative direction. I mean, for some penguin populations, they're expanding their range, while others are retracting. So, as with most things in life, there's going to be some winners and some losers.
All right.
But,
Hey,
things are changing.
now, so do those guides tell you about, speaking of climate change, do they give any indication how long it takes that giant iceberg to start, melting, raising the water height and stuff like that? Is it a decades process? Does it take longer than that? Or did they really say?
Well, this huge iceberg that was broken up, is actively being studied. So there was just excitement of finding it.
Okay.
One of the reasons we went on this particular trip was that there were a lot of very knowledgeable people that were in charge that would talk with us. Like there was one guy who had a PhD in glaciology and
Another had a master's in history and
polar history, and
cool.
yeah, masters in marine biology. So we had some very knowledgeable people.
Yeah, the guides were very multi-talented.
Yeah. So we wanted to learn on this trip as well as have some fun.
No, I like that. I like learning from people who've been there a long time. That sounds pretty cool, especially getting sort of their viewpoint. Like, did you run into anybody that's been down there, say, working down there the last 10 years, 20 years?
I think their Solon or trip leader had probably been doing it for 10 years or so.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
The ornithologists had been down there for quite a while.
Okay. Question from Liz Nevers. How much clothing did you bring and how much was supplied by the cruise line? You all seem to be wearing a lot of the same yellow jackets.
So the yellow jackets were provided, and we got to bring them home with us. They also provided Arctic muck boots, which were the boots we were wearing. We had to leave those behind. But the rest of it was, they gave us a shopping list of what to bring. There was only like room for, one suitcase.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
You wore the same things a lot.
And sometimes you did some laundry in
the sink. But yeah, and
no, say all that the trouble they take to make sure you don't bring in seeds and stuff like that from other areas. Do you just still catch glimpses of dandelions or some things like that?
Not really in South Georgia. I think there's more exotics in the Falklands, because there's much more traffic, trade there.
Okay.
Not South Georgia or Antarctica.
All right, question from Barry Hartup, our new BRPA president, by the way. Looks like you had remarkably calm seas. Do you feel fortunate, or is it common for that time of year?
We were quite fortunate. Some of the biggest waters we had was in the crossing of the Drake, and he may have had some 3 or 4 meter waves. We both wore patches behind her ears on the long crossings, and didn't suffer too much seasickness. But I think on one of the days in the Drake, there was, fewer people in the dining room for dinner than normal.
We were pretty lucky that we didn't get huge waves
Yeah,
on the Drake
and
Passage.
part of that was the skill of the captain and the expedition leader. There is, pretty good weather forecast with wind forecast, and they made some adjustments to try to keep us in calmer waters.
Okay. So would you recommend this trip for, say, a Friday night hike with a potluck afterwards?
Sure, why not?
So were you guys like on a waiting list to take this? I mean, how does that work?
How far in advance did
A
we?
year in advance, I think we signed up.
Okay.
And, I think when we signed up, there was, a few openings. Like when we first signed up, we weren't sure that we were going to get into the kayak option, but that opened up. We still got on a waiting list for that and managed to get into that. But
Okay.
yeah, it does take some prior planning.
And do you have to tell them how advanced you are kayaking before they let you in?
They wanted to know that we had some prior experience, and at the, as we were transiting from the Falklands to South Georgia, they started having meetings of the team kayak, and went around the room assessing, asking everybody to describe their experience, and it varied. There was some people that were as skilled as us, and many were not.
Okay.
So they didn't require any tests beforehand.
And a question about the name of the trip provider.
Quark, Q-U-A-R-K, Quark Expeditions.
Okay.
Yeah, and we're not real typical cruise people at all. I can't ever see myself going on a normal cruise, but this was a big enough ship that if we had gotten into big waves, it wouldn't have been horrendous. If you go on a super small ship across the Drake, you can have some real problems if you get into bad weather. So you want a big enough ship when you go to Antarctica, but 100 was enough. 100
Okay.
passengers was plenty.
For the Antarctic cruises, this was a relatively small ship.
Right. We didn't really want any bigger.
So what'd you do for those 2 days? Just play sheep's head with your friends, or what'd you do?
That's when all these educated people that were on the crew would give lectures. So we would go to lectures about, Shackleton, or about icebergs, or glaciers, and
Penguin ecology. Or
yeah, that's the kind of stuff that
learn about
we did.
seals and whales.
Yeah, no, that makes some sense. No, that's excellent. Next question from Sylvie Stevens. What was your favorite animal that you saw on the trip? We can start with Karen.
Oh, I think mine was king penguins, because they followed me, and I just felt this bond to those guys, and yeah, I love them.
Yeah, you missed those little guys.
Cool.
Yeah.
Robert, how about you?
King penguins would probably have to be pretty high on the list.
Were those the
All
ones with the
whales were great,
kazoos?
too.
Yeah. What was that?
Were those the ones with the kazoos?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is excellent. One more from Jim O'Neill. Did you have to know how to do an Eskimo roll in your kayak?
No, that was not required.
Which is good.
Did
I
anybody
tried.
accidentally do one of those? It looks pretty cold.
Yeah. So only one person tipped on one occasion, and the guides were to him and had him back in his boat within minutes. And there was always a safety Zodiac sort of off in the distance that could zip in and provide warm clothing, or if need be, take you back to the ship. Or so.
Okay. Because
it was
leopard
all-
seals have been known to kill people. Was that your phrase?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's about it for the night. If nobody else has anything, I believe we can go, and you guys can clap into the screen, into the silence there. It'd be perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Maybe we
Robert.
should
Thanks, Karen.
Join us.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, you can unmute and say thanks, bye, whatever you like to do.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Really loved it.
You enjoyed it tonight?
Thank you.
Yes.
Fantastic.
Thank
All right,
you.
well, we'll see you guys in 1 month's time, and have a nice night.
You there.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Todd.
Todd.
Bye-bye.
Is the link the same for next time, or is this a different link?
What's that? Oh, I'll give you guys a different link.
Okay.
Good question.
Bonnie. I think I saw up to 37.
There, 40.
Okay.
Yeah, there was a good amount, Robert.
Yeah, I think we
Yeah.
had close over 40 at one time.
Yeah.
Look at the chat for a second.
Okay.
All right, so I think it worked well that way. The chat's a little interesting to work with. I had people email me saying they're having trouble getting in, but I think we got most people involved, so that's good.
Yeah. I think it went well. So,
Yeah.
Thanks for hosting us.
Yeah.
No problem. Sorry about the Mirror Lake joke, but you know,
No, that's
No
okay.
problem. No
watching all
problem.
that, it's like, oh my God, that is fantastic. I still can't believe that was only a year ago. Seems like a decade ago.
No. Yep.
So you two have
Hi,
something like
Maya.
that. Oh yeah,
It's only been a
it's
year.
mine. Yeah, there you go.
Maya.
So are you planning on something like this again? If things open up?
Well, before this trip, it was a big enough trip that we hadn't planned anything after it. And once we got back, it's sort of like, well, let's sort of wait and see what happens. I
Okay.
mean, there's lots. I mean, she actually has a written down bucket list.
And this is from before I even met him, so the bucket list.
You got a pretty big bucket list. You've been all over the
Yeah.
place.
But
But
yeah,
see.
and there's a lot of places we'd like to go, but we haven't started. We're waiting for the world to get sorted out.
Yeah, okay. Some of those photos are just awesome. The sunset things, and I'm sure you're sitting on a mound more that you just haven't shown people, but
How many did you have when you came back?
Oh, I don't know. There might have been close to 10,000 pictures.
yeah, that sounds about right. I remember when the world went from film to digital, it was like all of a sudden you could just take a gazillion of these things, but
Yeah.
Yeah, I have deleted some, but yeah, try to whittle it down to the best.
So do you load those up in a cloud then, just so you don't ever lose them?
No,
Or do you keep them on a thumb drive?
I've got, backups on external hard drives, and
Okay, all in one house?
so far,
I keep mine in the firebox,
Okay. Yeah, good thinking.
my backup. Yeah.
Well, you too. I sure
Okay.
appreciate it. So
Okay, sure.
have a
Fun to
lovely
do.
night. Fun working with you.
So long.
thank you.
Bye-bye.